Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're not riding off into the sunset or tipping our hat in a dusty saloon. Instead, we're settling into the long, slow truth of life as a real cowboy. Not the movie version, the real version. Blistered hands, bad coffee, stiff saddles, and weeks without a bath. It wasn't all freedom and wide open skies. It was cold mornings, hard ground, and pay that barely bought a decent pair of boots. But there's something quietly compelling in the rhythm of it all. Lonely rides, creaking leather, and the crackle of a fire as the prairie wind whispers past. So, if you're ready, let's lean back, take a breath, and explore why, for all its romance, it really did suck to be a cowboy. An 1880s cowboy on horseback, gazing across the plains. In popular imagination, the old-time cowboy rides free under endless skies, a daring hero of the Wild West. But the reality of cowboy life in the 1865 to 1890 era was far from glamorous. Being a cowboy meant long, grinding days of work for little pay, facing brutal weather and constant dangers. It was a life of dust, sweat and loneliness, with primitive living conditions and scant comfort. As you listen, picture yourself in a cowboy's worn boots. You'll soon feel why it sucked to be a cowboy in the Wild West. The cowboy of legend might seem larger than life, but real cowboys were basically poorly paid ranch laborers. A typical cowboy earned about $1 a day, roughly $25 to $40 per month. It was economic hardship for most, not riches or glory. Imagine toiling from before sunrise to after sunset, dusty and sore, only to pocket wages that barely bought a new pair of boots. Cowboys were usually young men from the lower rungs of society, including former soldiers, African Americans, Mexicans, and drifters, all drawn west by the promise of work. Regardless of background, the pay was low and the work relentless. When not out on a long trail drive, a cowboy typically lived at the ranch in a simple bunkhouse provided as part of his pay. This was no luxury apartment. Usually it was a drafty barracks-like shack with a single room crammed with narrow cots or bunks. Privacy was non-existent and amenities were few. You'd stuff your saddle or a bundled coat under your head for a pillow. The bunkhouse might at least offer a roof and a stove, but it also had its share of pests and smells. In summer it was stifling. In winter, the stove's warmth barely reached the far corners. Crowded with fellow cowhands, all unbathed and tired, the bunkhouse air was thick. A cowboy earned little, and even his shelter reminded him of that fact. Out on the open range or during cattle drives, you often didn't even have a bunkhouse. Your bed was the ground and your ceiling the stars. Payment for such rough duty might come as a single lump sum at the end of a long drive. Trail cowboys in the 1870s could make around $40 a month plus meals, better than some ranch wages. But remember that a trail drive lasted several months of grueling travel. When the drive was over and cowboys rode into a rail town to collect their pay, many would quickly spend those hard-earned dollars in a few nights of revelry. After months of deprivation, it was easy to squander it on whiskey, hot meals, or a soft bed at a hotel. A famous saying was that a cowboy's money burned a hole in his pocket. By the time he headed back to the ranch, he might be nearly broke again. In short, the work was hard and the rewards meager, a far cry from the wealth and adventure portrayed in dime novels. From the moment the first pale light of dawn crept over the prairie, the cowboy's workday began, and it would not end until well after sunset. Long, hard hours of labor were the norm. You'd roll out of your bedding while the stars were still in the sky, your muscles protesting from yesterday's ride. The cook's call, bacon in the pan, coffee in the pot, might be the only pleasant part of waking up. By first light, you and your horse were already out with the herd. For the next 12 to 15 hours, you'd be in the saddle, nudging stubborn cattle along, circling strays, and enduring whatever the sky threw at you. And the sky threw plenty. Weather on the western plains was merciless. In high summer, the sun beat down ferociously, baking the earth and anyone on it. You'd feel the sun's glare through your wide-brimmed hat, your skin turned leather brown and your lips cracked. The heat could shimmer in waves off the prairie, and mirages danced on the horizon. Dust devils swirled around the herd, and by midday your shirt would be soaked with sweat beneath a layer of fine grit. Cowboys tried to protect themselves, a brimmed Stetson hat to shield the eyes, a bandana over the nose and mouth, but dust still coated every inch of skin and clothing. Cowboys still complained often of sand in their teeth, one writer noted of those dust-choked days. Indeed, despite tying a bandana across your face, grit worked its way in. After hours of driving cattle over dry ground, dust would cling to you as thick as fur, and you'd be coughing on it for days. But if it wasn't dust, it was mud and rain. On the plains, weather could flip in an instant. A morning of clear skies might give way to an afternoon thunderstorm. Heavy rains could turn the trail into a quagmire of sticky mud. Suddenly every step for the cattle was a struggle, and your horse's hooves sank deep. You'd be soaked to the bone in a chilly downpour, trying to coerce reluctant cattle forward as lightning stabbed the horizon. There was no escape from the rain, no shelter, just a slicker, a crude oilcloth raincoat, if you had one. You try to stay dry, but everything is soaked, including your only bed for the night. Then the rain might stop as abruptly as it began, leaving you wet and shivering under an open sky. Nights brought their own extremes. After a blazing day, temperatures often plummeted after sunset. The same cowboy who sweated all afternoon could be chattering his teeth by midnight. Wrapped in a blanket on the ground, you'd feel the chill seeping up from the earth. In some regions, autumn nights or higher elevations could bring frost. There were legendary accounts of cowboys waking to find their water buckets skinned with ice. And in winter, on northern ranches, life grew even harsher. Blizzards could roar across the plains without warning. Snow and sleet would blind and freeze. Thousands of cattle and some cowboys perished in the catastrophic blizzards of the late 1880s. A cowboy's clothing was never truly adequate for those bitter winds. He layered woolen long johns, flannel shirts, and whatever coat he could scrounge, but still the cold sliced through. Yet duty demanded riding out even in terrible weather. Livestock needed checking and feeding. So you'd spur your horse through driving snow or freezing rain, fingers numb around the reins. Great Plains weather swung from one extreme to the other, and the cowboy had to endure it all in the open. Life in the saddle was not just uncomfortable, it was outright dangerous. The cowboy's world was full of hazards that could maim or kill a person in an eye blink. One moment of bad luck, one misstep by a horse, or one angry steer could spell disaster. Out on a cattle drive especially, you lived on a knife's edge between routine and calamity. Perhaps the most feared danger was the stampede. At night, as you try to snatch a few hours of rest under the stars, an entire herd of cattle might suddenly bolt in blind panic. A lightning strike, a wolf's howl, even a cowboy's sneeze at the wrong moment could set off a stampede. In the dark, you'd hear it before you see it, a growing rumble like thunder, then the ground shaking as thousands of hooves thunder off into the night. If you're unlucky, they're charging right through camp. In an instant, you and your pals could be scrambling for your lives, trying not to be trampled by a mass of terrified longhorns. Stampedes were mercifully infrequent, but every cowboy knew they were a real possibility. The knowledge kept you sleeping lightly, one ear tuned for the sound of sudden thunder. Stopping a stampede was nearly impossible. Cowboys could only ride hard at the flanks, hoping to turn the herd in a wide circle until they tired. It was chaotic, adrenaline-pumping work. After a night's stampede, you'd often find injured cattle, sometimes even injured cowboys, scattered along the trail come dawn. Many cowboys carried scars or broken bones as mementos of being caught in a cattle rush. Even without a full-blown stampede, cattle could be dangerous. Longhorns had sharp, curved horns and could weigh over half a ton. A frightened or cantankerous steer might charge a cowboy without warning. Getting gored or trampled was a constant risk. A moment's lapse in attention while cutting a cow from the herd, and you might find yourself thrown and under angry hooves. Cowboys learned to be alert around the herd, but accidents happened. A swinging horn could break ribs, a kick could knock out teeth or worse. The horse, a cowboy's best friend, could also be his downfall, literally. You spent most of the day on horseback, which meant plenty of chances to be thrown or injured by your mount. A horse might stumble in a prairie dog hole, pitching you head first to the ground, or it might spook at a snake and rear up unexpectedly. Skilled riders still got bucked off now and then. A bad fall could leave a cowboy with a sprained wrist, a broken arm, or a concussion. More than a few cowboys ended their careers early due to crippling injuries from horse accidents. If your foot caught in the stirrup as you fell, you could be dragged, a truly deadly scenario. There was no ambulance on the frontier, A severe injury miles from town meant you simply had to endure the pain and hope for the best. Cowboys often had to set their own broken bones or have a compadre splint it with whatever was at hand. Then there were river crossings, among the most perilous moments of a long drive. You might reach a swollen river that the herd has to ford. The cattle bunch up on the bank, lowing anxiously. You steel yourself and urge your horse into the current, leading the way. Midstream, chaos can strike. A floating log or a sudden drop-off in the riverbed might cause the led cattle to panic and turn back. In a heartbeat, the herd is milling, circling in the river. Hundreds of animals bumping and drowning in confusion. Cowboys have to plunge into the milling herd on horseback, shouting and cracking whips to force the cattle to swim onward. It's a desperate fight against the herd's instinct to turn back. In such turmoil, cowboys themselves sometimes drowned, knocked off their horses by thrashing steers, their heavy wool clothes and boots pulling them under. There are accounts of entire crews losing men and scores of cattle in a bad river crossing. If you didn't know how to swim, and surprisingly, many cowboys did not, a deep river was a mortal threat. Graves of drowned cowboys dotted the banks of well-known crossing sites, grim reminders of the risks. The natural world of the West had countless other dangers too. Rattlesnakes were common in many areas. A bite on the trail, far from any doctor, could be a death sentence. Lightning posed another lethal threat. A cowboy on horseback was often the tallest thing on an open plain during a storm, essentially a human lightning rod. Tales abound of cowboys struck by lightning, sometimes killing horse and rider on the spot. In fact, an old cowboy poem bitterly notes the many ways a cowboy might die. Some were killed by lightning, some when the cattle run, others were killed by horses, and some with the old 6-gun. That line hints at yet another hazard: firearms. Despite their depiction in Western movies, gunplay was actually a minor part of a cowboy's daily life. Gunfights were rare and gunshot wounds usually accidental. Cowboys did carry revolvers or rifles at times, particularly on the ranch or when riding guard at night, to scare off predators or rustlers. But during the hard work of daytime cattle driving, guns were usually packed away in the wagon. There was simply too much risk of a firearm going off if worn on a bouncing horse. If a cowboy did wear a sidearm, he kept it high on the waist or in a saddlebag, no low-slung holsters ready for duels at high noon. The Wild West shootout was mostly a myth. Still, the presence of guns meant accidents did occur. A loaded revolver could drop and discharge, or a careless moment cleaning a rifle could send a bullet into someone's foot. And of course, when cowboys hit town after a long drive, some did get into drunken fights that occasionally turned violent. But those melodramatic showdowns were the exception, not the rule. Even human threats like bandits or hostile encounters were relatively uncommon compared to the relentless dangers of nature. Cattle thieves, rustlers did exist, and cowboys on guard duty had to keep an eye out for them at night. There were also tensions with some Native American groups in certain areas, especially in the years just after the Civil War. Trail drives crossed through Indian territory, and a few drives did face attacks or theft of cattle. But by the 1870s and 1880s, such incidents had waned as U.S. military campaigns forced native tribes onto reservations. The typical cowboy was more likely to battle boredom than bullets. Nevertheless, every time you rode out, you understood that life as a cowboy carried real risks. There was no workers' comp, no safety net. Out here it was just you and your grit. If you made a mistake or fate went against you, you might not live to see the next sunrise. When you imagine cowboy life, you might picture the dust and sweat. And you'd be right. Hygiene for cowboys was notoriously primitive, one of many aspects of the job that truly sucked. After days on the trail, a cowboy was caked in dirt, sweat, and cattle grime. Bathing facilities on the open range, virtually none. Going weeks without a real bath was common. You might rinse off in a creek if one was handy on a rest day, but often there wasn't time or warm enough weather for that. As a result, the typical cowboy carried a powerful odor, a mix of horse, cow, wood smoke, and human sweat that never quite left his clothes or body. Clothing was seldom washed on the trail. You owned maybe 2 shirts, and one of those might just be for going to town. So your daily wear, a wool or flannel shirt, canvas or denim pants, long underwear, socks, stayed on you unwashed for the entire drive. After long sweaty days and nights on the ground, those clothes could nearly stand up by themselves from dirt. Lice, fleas and bedbugs were constant companions in this lifestyle. Cowboys often joked about it. In fact, the bedroll was humorously nicknamed the flea trap, acknowledging how infested your blankets could get. At night, when you unrolled your bedding by the chuck wagon, you wouldn't be surprised to see a few bugs hop off. Itching bites were just part of life, and you got used to flicking fleas off your socks or shaking out your hat in the morning to dislodge any creepy crawlies. On the trail, you also had to contend with the swarms of insects drawn to the cattle. Flies and gnats swarmed by day, mosquitoes by night. Imagine spending hours riding drag, the back of the herd. You're enveloped in a cloud of dust and flies drawn to the cattle's leavings. By evening, your face and neck might be dotted with insect bites and your hands sticky with fly specks. Come nightfall, near any water source, out came the mosquitoes, whining in your ears as you tried to get some sleep. Without modern bug spray, a cowboy's best defense was smoke. Staying near the campfire, smoke could keep some mosquitoes at bay, or covering up with a blanket despite the heat. It was a losing battle. You'd wake up with new itchy welts more often than not. In some regions, there were also ticks and chiggers in the grass, little biting pests that could burrow into your skin. A cowboy might absent-mindedly scratch at something all day long, a tick in his waistband, lice in his hair, flea bites on his ankles. And how about personal grooming? Well, cowboys did what they could under the circumstances, but it was minimal. Shaving regularly was impractical on the trail. No time and no running water, so stubble turned to full beards. Many cowboys sported rough beards not as a style choice, but by necessity. Teeth brushing was haphazard at best. Dental hygiene was essentially non-existent. A shared toothbrush hanging at a public bunkhouse might be used by a bold few, but more often a cowboy just didn't bother. If a tooth ached, perhaps a swig of whiskey or clove oil would numb it. Serious toothaches might mean pulling the tooth out with whatever tools at hand. It was not uncommon for middle-aged cowboys to have quite a few teeth missing or rotted, given the lack of dental care and a diet high in black coffee and tobacco. Speaking of tobacco, many cowboys chewed tobacco, which didn't help the cleanliness factor. You'd see brown streams of tobacco juice being spat into the dirt or into the campfire. The habit kept nerves calm and boredom at bay, but it also meant spit-stained shirts and teeth. Some cowboys smoked hand-rolled cigarettes or a pipe around the campfire, adding another layer of smell to their already pungent presence. When a cowboy finally did reach a town or trading post, one of the first orders of business after a drink was often to get a hot bath. Bathhouses in cattle towns did brisk business. For a few cents you could soak in a tub of hot water, which must have felt like heaven after months of cold creek dips. The water would turn brown with dirt almost immediately. It was said you could tell a cowboy in town by the trail of grime he left in the bathhouse tub. And after the bath, maybe a barber for a shave and haircut, peeling off weeks of grit. But such clean interludes were short-lived. As soon as the cowboy returned to the range, the dirt and sweat cycle began anew. Back at the ranch bunkhouse, hygiene was only marginally better than on the trail. Perhaps there was a wash tub that a few men might use, sharing the same water. Maybe on Sundays, if not working, a cowboy could wash some clothes or himself. More likely, he just continued living in his own dirt. The bunkhouse itself was often filthy, muddy boots, manure-caked spurs, and dust everywhere. Lice and bedbugs thrived in the bunks, and the place usually smelled of men, horses, leather, and old food. The cowboys did what they could to keep vermin down, hanging up their bedding in sunlight to kill some bugs, or smoking them out with burning sulfur rags, but one could never fully win against the pests. Even basic sanitation was rough. Toilets, as we know them, didn't exist on the trail. Cowboys answered nature's call in the bushes, or behind a dune, with perhaps some grass or leaves, or even a handy cow chip for toilet paper. On a ranch, there might be a simple outhouse, but out on the open range you just took care of business under the open sky. It wasn't talked about much, but it was yet another everyday inconvenience. A cowboy with an upset stomach, not uncommon, given the questionable water and monotonous diet, might find himself uncomfortably trotting off away from the campfire in the dark, hoping he didn't sit on a cactus in the process. In summary, the Old West was a filthy place by modern standards, and cowboys possibly had it filthier than most. They dwelled in primitive surroundings with lice, fleas and bedbugs, as one historian put it bluntly. Clean water was scarce, soap was a luxury, and a clean-shaven, sweet-smelling cowboy was essentially a contradiction in terms. It's no wonder that when cowboys rode into town, Townsfolk could often smell them before they saw them. Hygiene was one more thing a cowboy sacrificed in order to do his job, and it certainly made the cowboy's life a rough one. Ride out into the middle of the prairie on a quiet day and listen. You might hear the wind whispering through the grass, the distant low of cattle, maybe the creak of saddle leather. What you won't hear is the sound of a busy town or family life. Loneliness was the silent companion of every cowboy. For all the camaraderie among cowhands, the cowboy life was inherently isolated and lonesome, and that wore on a man's spirit over time. Consider the setting: vast open ranges, often sparsely populated. A cattle drive crew was typically just 10 to 15 men, driving 2,000 head of cattle across hundreds of miles. For months on end, those few cowboys might be the only human faces you'd see. You and your horse might spend hours apart from the others, holding a far flank of the herd. The sheer expanse of land and sky could make a man feel tiny and alone. At night, when you rode out to take your turn on guard duty, you might be completely by yourself, circling the herd under the stars while everyone else slept. The only sounds might be cattle snuffling and the lonely call of a coyote. Many cowboys talked or sang to themselves and the cattle on night guard just to break the eerie silence and to stay awake. You'd hum a quiet tune to keep the herd calm, and maybe to comfort yourself too. Most cowboys were young and single, often in their late teens or 20s. They had left families behind, or had none to begin with. Letters from home were rare luxuries, given the difficulty of mail delivery on the trail. If you had sweethearts or relatives back east or in another state, you might go months without any communication. In the meantime, you lived in a world of men and animals. The absence of women was notable. Contrary to Hollywood films that show saloon girls in every town, out on the range cowboys went weeks or months without seeing a woman at all. This led to a culture of rough, exclusively male companionship. They made do telling tall tales, giving each other nicknames, and sometimes engaging in rowdy stag dances where cowboys would pair up and dance to music, half in jest because there were no ladies to dance with. Those dances around the campfire, with one man leading and another backstepping as the girl, were both a bit of fun and a poignant reminder of what was missing. Boredom and loneliness often went hand in hand. Much of a cowboy's day was repetitive routine. Once the initial excitement of a trail drive faded, you were left with day after day of plodding along at the herd's pace, maybe 10 or 15 miles a day across monotonic landscapes. One cowboy described it as hours of riding in silence, with nothing but your thoughts and the raw elements around you. To stave off boredom and not dwell on loneliness, cowboys got creative. They told raunchy jokes and spun yarns during breaks. They played simple games of chance, like pitching coins or carving little figurines from wood. Around the chuck wagon at night, someone might pull out a harmonica or a fiddle if one was carried along, and the men would enjoy a few songs. Often they sang the old trail songs together, tunes about home on the range, lost loves or the cowboys' trials. These songs were a form of emotional release, a way to voice their loneliness in a communal way. One famous cowboy song, The Old Chisholm Trail, humorously catalogues the miseries of the drive, its bacon and beans most every day, etc., which surely got knowing laughs. Others, like Home on the Range, expressed a wistful longing for peace and home. In singing together, the cowboys found solidarity, a brief feeling that they weren't so alone after all. Still, each man privately grappled with solitude. Nights could be especially hard. Picture lying on your bedroll after the campfire has died down, the Milky Way blazing overhead in the deep black of a prairie night. It is breathtakingly beautiful, yet it also reminds you that you are out in the middle of nowhere, a tiny speck under an infinite sky. If you have troubles or fears, you have mostly yourself to rely on. You can't exactly drop in on a neighbor for a chat or see your family for comfort. Some cowboys coped by talking to their horses. A cowboy might develop a deep bond with his favorite mount, treating the horse almost like a confidant. After all, that horse was with him more constantly than any human. It wasn't unusual for a cowboy to gently pat his horse's neck during a quiet moment and murmur whatever was on his mind. Occasionally, loneliness and rough conditions led cowboys into melancholy or the blues. In the letters and memoirs that survive, you can read hints of homesickness and emotional strain. They use terms like lonesome as a prairie wolf to describe particularly isolated assignments, such as line riding, patrolling fence lines, or isolated parts of the range alone for days. Some turn to drink when they finally hit town, as a way to forget their loneliness for a spell. Others channeled it into creativity, A number of cowboy poems and songs were composed by nameless cowpokes with a bit of poetic streak, humming to the cattle at midnight. It's important to note that while the cowboy life was lonely, a strong sense of camaraderie also existed among the men sharing these hardships. Out of necessity, cowboys relied on each other. If you're caught in a dangerous stampede or pinned under a fallen horse, it's your fellow cowboy who will risk himself to save you. This forged bonds of brotherhood. Around the campfire, some nights would find the crew swapping life stories, a rare opening up during an otherwise stoic day. In that sense, cowboys created a sort of surrogate family on the trail. They teased each other, gave each other crudely affectionate nicknames, and celebrated each other's small victories, like a successful roping or a daring ride to cut off a bolting steer. These friendships eased the loneliness somewhat. Nonetheless, when the drive ended or the season changed and some cowboys drifted to new jobs, those bonds often broke as quickly as they'd formed. The cowboy might have close trail pals he never sees again after the cattle are delivered and each rider goes his own way. The life was transient. Many an old cowboy would reflect that he had partners in every cowtown from Texas to Wyoming, yet no wife or family anywhere. Drifting from ranch to ranch, job to job was common, and it meant not putting down roots. As the saying went, he wasn't born to settle, he was born to ride. That freedom had a flip side in loneliness. In summary, loneliness seeped into a cowboy's bones as surely as the dust and cold did. The wide open spaces that looked so romantically free were in day-to-day reality often empty and isolating. If you were a cowboy, you learned to live with solitude, to find comfort in the stars, the rhythm of your horse's hoofbeats, and the companionship of a few fellow riders as lonely as yourself. It was one more hardship that defined why the cowboy's life, for all its legends, was hard indeed. After a long day wrestling cattle, a cowboy's stomach growled for something filling. But gourmet cuisine was the last thing you'd find on the range. Food for cowboys was simple, repetitive, and often barely tolerable, though it did pack the calories needed for hard work. If variety is the spice of life, then cowboy fare was pretty bland, and often literally spicy, since salt pork and chili peppers might be the only seasonings. On a cattle drive, meals came off the chuck wagon, a rolling kitchen first invented by legendary rancher Charles Goodnight in 1866. The trail cook, often called Cookie, was a crucial member of the crew, second only to the trail boss in authority. Cookie was valued not just for keeping everyone fed, but also because he usually dispensed medicine and first aid and settled minor disputes, making him part chef, part doctor, part referee. His domain was a sturdy wagon outfitted with shelves and barrels holding the drive's provisions. And what provisions they were! The standard menu on the trail consisted of a few basic staples: beans, bacon, salt pork, biscuits, and coffee. Day in and day out, those were the core of a cowboy's diet. Breakfast might be black coffee, sourdough biscuits, and bacon or salt pork fried up in a pan. If you were lucky, there'd be a few dried apples reconstituted into a sort of mush, or maybe a bit of wild game meat someone hunted the night before. Not common, but occasionally a rabbit or prairie chicken could end up in the pot. Mostly, though, it was the same greasy bacon and heavy biscuits. The cook's biscuits were often baked in a Dutch oven right on the coals, and a good cook guarded his sourdough starter like gold. It was the key to fluffy biscuits. Many cowboys would grab a couple of biscuits from breakfast and stick them in their pockets or saddlebag to eat later on the trail. Those biscuits, tough and dry as they could be, were lifesavers when hunger hit at midday. Lunch on a drive was usually not a formal stop. Often it was just what you could eat on horseback. One common practice was for cowboys to keep a piece of hardtack or jerky in a pocket. Hardtack was an extremely hard, dry cracker or bread that could practically survive a nuclear blast. You'd gnaw on that, maybe along with some cold beans saved from breakfast or a strip of dried beef. It wasn't much, but stopping the entire herd for a lunch break wasn't practical. Better to keep them moseying along and snack as you rode. On some drives, the chuck wagon would go ahead and have a quick stew or son-of-a-gun stew, made from whatever bits of beef could be spared, ready around noon, but more often not. Supper was the main meal, and something to look forward to. As evening fell and the herd was settled for the night, the cook would already have a fire going and a pot of beans boiling. Beans were a staple: pinto beans or navy beans, slow cooked with maybe a bit of bacon for flavor. They were cheap, filling, and provided some protein. Alongside the beans, there'd be more biscuits or perhaps cornbread if cornmeal was carried. Occasionally, the cook might make a pot of stew if any fresh meat was available. If a cow had to be put down due to injury, for example, that meant fresh beef on the menu, a small consolation for losing an animal. Then everyone would enjoy a rare treat of beef stew with potatoes and onions, if those were on hand, or just beef grilled over coals. But such variety was infrequent. More commonly, night after night, it was beans and salted meat. Beef and beans became synonymous with cowboy food. The monotony was sometimes broken by frijoles, beans spiced with chilies if near the southwest, or by sourdough bullets, the nickname for hard biscuits, slathered with a bit of molasses or jam from a tin, if the cook rationed out something sweet. Fresh vegetables were practically non-existent. Vegetables didn't play a big part in their diet, as one account notes dryly. No surprise there, green stuff simply didn't travel well and wasn't available on the wild range. Cowboys often became deficient in vitamins without knowing it. They jokingly called themselves scurvy riders at times, as some surely developed mild scurvy from lack of produce. An observant cowboy might notice his gums bleeding after months of straight beans and salt pork, an early sign of scurvy. But there was little to be done aside from occasionally getting wild berries or asking the cook for vinegar. Some carried vinegar or citrus if they could. Coffee deserves a special mention. It was the fuel that kept cowboys going. The coffee was almost always strong, black and boiling hot. So strong that one joke went, if you drop a horseshoe in the coffee and it floats, it's strong enough. Cowboys drank coffee in the morning to get started, and often in the evening to warm up or keep awake on night guard. It was made by throwing loose coffee grounds into a pot of water on the fire. When ready, a dash of cold water settled the grounds, and it was served in tin cups. It was usually bitter as bile, possibly burned, and sometimes flavored with whatever was handy, like eggshells or a bit of salt to cut the bitterness. But to a trail-weary cowboy, that hot tin cup between his hands as dawn light broke or as he sat by the night fire was pure comfort. They'd joke that coffee was belly wash or paint remover, yet they cherished it. A sip of coffee could make a cold morning slightly more bearable. Not that a cowboy's digestive system got an easy ride. A diet so heavy in beans and greasy meat had predictable effects. Indigestion and dysentery were common occurrences, as one frontier chronicler noted. Beans are notorious for causing gas, and around the campfire, the cowboys were not exactly polite society. One can imagine the symphony of gastric noises that might accompany a typical dinner. They joked and teased each other about it, making light of what could be an uncomfortable problem. More serious gastrointestinal issues, like dysentery, a severe diarrhea often due to bad water or poor sanitation, did strike at times. The cowboy suffering from the runs still had to ride and do his job, just perhaps with more frequent dashes behind a bush. The combination of questionable water sources, some water holes were tainted or stagnant, and plain diet meant stomach ailments flared up now and then. When a drive ended and cowboys rode into a town like Dodge City or Abilene, one of the greatest rewards was a chance to eat something different. Many went straight for the nearest saloon and then to a restaurant. Yes, cattle towns had eateries eager to serve flush with cash cowboys. A steak with eggs and potatoes, or a slice of fresh pie, tasted like heaven after months of trail grub. Some craved vegetables. There are stories of cowboys devouring tomatoes, pickles, or salads in town, as if they were candy, to satisfy a scurvy-starved body's craving. But such luxuries were short-lived before it was back to beans and bacon on the ranch. On the ranch, the fare might be marginally better than on the trail, depending on the outfit's prosperity. A ranch cook might have a chicken coop for eggs, or a garden for a few vegetables. Maybe fresh bread could be baked when supplies came in. But overall, cowboy cuisine was about durability and calories, not taste. Flour, beans, coffee, sugar, salt pork, and maybe dried fruit. These built the meals. Monotony was guaranteed. As one cowboy said, "We had beans for breakfast, beans for dinner, and beans for supper. If we wanted a change of diet, we'd have bacon and beans." Yet, in that rough food there was some comfort. Imagine a chilly night after hours of riding, when you finally sit by the fire. The cook hands you a tin plate piled with steaming beans and a slab of salty pork, with maybe a newly baked biscuit to soak up the juices. It's not fine dining, but as you savor each bite, feeling warmth return to your body, it's satisfying. Hunger is the best sauce, they say, and cowboys often ate with gusto simply because they were ravenous. They'd joke and banter around the chuck wagon as they filled their bellies, creating a semblance of home in the wild. Cookie might even surprise the crew with a special sweet treat now and then, perhaps spotted pup, a kind of rice pudding with raisins or fritters dusted with sugar. These little delights could brighten morale on a tough day. All in all, though, a steady diet of hardtack, beans and black coffee took its toll. Cowboys grew lean and leathery. Many suffered from heartburn and the misery, their term for stomach troubles. Yet, just like every other hardship, they met it with a shrug and humor. That's why we're so tough, a cowboy might say. Ain't nothing soft in our food or our life. After a day of bone-wearying labor, any person would crave a good night's sleep. But for cowboys, sound, comfortable sleep was a rare luxury. Long work days flowed into restless nights, and the cycle of exhaustion never quite let up. In the open frontier, a cowboy's bed was often just the hard ground, and his sleep was easily interrupted by duty or danger. On the trail, there was no such thing as an 8-hour slumber. Cowboys were chronically sleep-deprived. A typical night during a cattle drive was divided into shifts for night guard. The herd had to be watched 24/7 to prevent straying or to respond to threats like wolves or a potential stampede. So the cowboys took turns standing watch in pairs while others caught some shut-eye. Each night guard shift usually lasted about 2 hours. If you're lucky, you might get 2 shifts of sleep, say one early night, one late night, adding up to maybe 4 or 5 hours total of fitful dozing. And that's on a normal night when nothing goes wrong. Picture the scene. After dinner, the men spread their bedrolls in a rough circle near the chuck wagon, close to the comforting glow of the dying campfire. You wrap yourself in your blankets, using your saddle as a pillow. The ground is your mattress. Uneven, maybe cold, maybe damp. If it's an area with rocks, you're likely poked in the back all night by a stray pebble or root. If it's been raining, the earth is soggy, and you feel the moisture seeping through despite your canvas ground sheet. You wiggle a bit, trying to find a position that doesn't aggravate the day's saddle sores on your rear and thighs. Yes, saddle sores were very real and made lying down tender. Exhaustion helps. Your body is so tired, you might drift off for a few minutes until it's your turn for guard duty. One of your pals nudges you. Your watch. You pry your eyes open, force yourself up, and in a stupor you mount your horse to ride slow circles around the herd in the dark. Fighting off sleep while on night guard is its own special torture. Cowboys sometimes sang or whistled softly to keep themselves awake and to soothe the cattle. The stars wheel overhead, and you catch yourself swaying in the saddle from fatigue. When your 2-hour shift is up, you swap with another cowhand. Back to bed. But by now any warmth your body had made under the blankets is gone. You lie down and the cold clings to you, your muscles stiffening up. Perhaps you fall into a deeper sleep this time out of sheer need. Next thing you know, it's pre-dawn, and Cookie is rattling the cookpot or ringing a bell for wake-up. Morning again, all too soon. You'd wake up sore and still tired, your back protesting the hard ground as you try to stand. It was a young man's game. Older cowboys often said the thing that drove them out of the profession wasn't the work, it was the cumulative lack of decent sleep for years on end. Even when you were sleeping, it might not be truly restful. Nature often intruded. In warm weather, insects might swarm you as you slept. The aforementioned fleas or mosquitoes whining in your ear. In snake country, you had to be mindful when bedding down. A snake might seek the warmth of your body or crawl under your blankets. Many a cowboy shook out his boots in the morning to evict any scorpion or centipede that might have taken refuge there overnight. Such thoughts don't foster peaceful slumber. If a horse neighed nervously or the cattle rustled about, the light-sleeping cowboy's eyes would snap open, hand on his gun perhaps, wondering what was amiss. You never slept entirely at ease, knowing the herd could panic or a thief could slip into camp. Weather, of course, also determined the quality of sleep. If it rained at night, unless there was a cave or abandoned shack nearby, rare luck, you simply got rained on. Some cowboys had a canvas tarp or oilcloth they could pull over themselves. It helped a bit, but invariably some water snuck in, and you'd wake up soggy and chilled. On cold nights, you might wear your clothes to bed, including boots sometimes, to stay warm. Cowboys often slept fully dressed, boots and all, especially if on guard rotation. No point undressing just to gear up again in 2 hours. In summertime, heat could be an issue. Imagine a night so hot that even in just a thin shirt you lie there sweating, the ground still radiating the day's heat, maybe swatting at mosquitoes, unable to get comfortable. Now consider bunkhouse life, which had its own sleep challenges. A bunkhouse on a ranch was usually a rough cabin with rows of simple cots or bunks. The mattresses, if any, were typically ticking stuffed with straw or hay, which over time became compacted, musty, and alive with bedbugs. Privacy was nil. Someone was likely snoring loudly a few feet away. The man next to you might talk in his sleep or thrash around. If a couple of the fellas had a bit too much to drink that evening, you might have a drunken chorus of mutterings or even a scuffle disturb your rest. Bunkhouse walls were thin, so the wind could whistle through gaps or a sandstorm might sift dust onto your blanket. And with a dozen hungry cowpokes living together, it wasn't the sweetest smelling dormitory. The odor of unwashed bodies and socks could be pretty offensive. All this made falling asleep an exercise in tolerance. Yet, as with everything, cowboys adapted. Pure exhaustion often carried them through to at least get some sleep, no matter the discomforts. They rolled up in their flea traps and grabbed catnaps whenever possible. It was common to see a cowboy doze off for a 10-minute nap in the saddle at noon, or while waiting for the herd to drink at a river, head bobbing, reins loose, horse just ambling along. Those little snatches of rest helped. There's a story of a trail boss who caught one of his drovers napping on horseback. Instead of scolding him, the boss said, "That horse knows the way. If a man's that tired, let him sleep." It was a compassionate nod to the reality that everyone was running on a sleep deficit. The lack of sleep had cumulative effects. Cowboys were known to be irritable at times, and who wouldn't be, running on half-charged batteries all the time? Tempers could flare, and small disagreements might turn into fistfights in the high-stress and fatigue environment. A wise trail boss would enforce some discipline to ensure everyone got at least a chance to rest, maybe rotating the easier night watch shifts among the men, or letting a particularly worn-out cowboy have a longer sleep one night. Despite all this, cowboys found ways to make the best of bedtime. Rituals developed, a last cup of coffee or a pipe smoke by the fire, some gentle strumming on a guitar or mouth harp if someone had one, quiet murmured conversations or jokes that tapered off as eyes grew heavy. Some cowboys were known to carry a Bible or a dime novel in their bedroll. By lantern light or firelight, they might read a few pages to settle their mind. Literacy varied, but many did read a bit. Others simply gazed at the embers of the fire and let their mind drift to memories of home or dreams of the future. In that half-lucid state between wakefulness and sleep, perhaps the hardships receded a little. When sleep finally came, it might be short and light, but it was precious. A cowboy often slept under the dome of a magnificent night sky, and if you woke at 2 a.m. for your turn at guard, you might catch sight of a meteor streaking across the heavens or the full moon silvering the prairie. Fleeting beauty in an otherwise rough life. And if dawn came too early, as it always did, you'd groan and stretch your aching back, roll up your bedding, gulp some coffee, and get back in the saddle. Tired or not, the work had to go on. In the end, chronic lack of sleep was just part of being a cowboy, something that aged them faster and surely made the job suck even more. After detailing so many hardships, one might wonder why anyone stuck with cowboy life at all. The truth is, amid all the difficulty, there were moments of quiet beauty and simple comfort that sustained these men. In the stillness of evening, when the work was done, a cowboy could experience a peace that's hard to find elsewhere. This final part of our journey focuses on those gentler aspects, the little routines and rewards at day's end that offered solace to a worn-out cowboy, and the almost spiritual calm of sleeping under the open sky. Picture a typical evening on a cattle drive. The sun is sinking low, painting the western horizon in hues of orange and pink. The heat of the day relents, and a cool twilight breeze whispers over the prairie grass. The herd has been rounded up and is grazing quietly or bedded down for the night, a living blanket of dark shapes spread out near the camp. The hard labor of the day is over. Now the cowboys gather around the campfire by the chuck wagon, drawn like moths to its warm glow. This is the cowboy's living room, his den, his safe haven for an hour or two. As darkness falls, Cookie ladles out the supper he's prepared, maybe the ever-present beans and bacon, but tonight they taste extra good, simply because you're starving. You sit on your bedroll or an upturned crate, tin plate in one hand, steaming coffee cup in the other. There is a lovely routine in this, the clink of tin plates and utensils, the crackle of the fire, the murmur of low voices swapping stories about the day's ride. A feeling of camaraderie soaks in. One cowboy might rib another about nearly falling off his horse at that afternoon's river crossing, and they all chuckle. Another might start humming a familiar tune, and soon a soft chorus hums along. With bellies finally full and muscles relaxing, many cowboys light up a hand-rolled cigarette or fill a pipe. The fragrant smell of tobacco mingles with wood smoke. Perhaps the cook has boiled a special pot of coffee as a nightcap. Cowboy coffee, so thick a spoon could almost stand in it. It might seem counterintuitive to drink coffee before bed, but after a day of exhaustion, a warm cup is soothing, and for those taking the first night watch, it's fuel to stay awake. You savor it slowly, feeling the heat radiate through the tin into your hands. This is the time when tough men get a bit softer. Someone might quietly strum a guitar if there is one. Some drives did carry a fiddle or guitar in the wagon for entertainment. If no instrument, then just voices suffice. A favorite campfire song might rise. "Oh, bury me not on the lone prairie." One man begins in a mellow baritone, and a couple of others join in quietly. The song is plaintive and sad, but it feels fitting, or perhaps it's a more upbeat ditty like "Git Along Little Doggies," which could bring a gentle laugh. Singing was more than entertainment. It was a way to unwind and bond, to let the emotional knots of the day loosen. Under the vast night sky, their untrained voices echo in the darkness, strangely comforting to the cattle and themselves. Conversations around the fire often turn to dreams and memories. A young cowboy might speak longingly of a girl back home, wondering aloud if she'll wait for him. An older hand might reminisce about a funny incident on a past drive, or spin a yarn about a notorious outlaw he supposedly met. Tales grew taller at night, and no one minded. Politics, news, and deeper subjects were occasionally touched on. Perhaps someone got hold of a newspaper in the last town and reads an interesting piece, but often it was lighter fare. "What'll you do when we get to Montana and get paid off?" one might ask. Another grins and answers, "Find the biggest steak and the prettiest senorita in town." They laugh, knowing it's an unlikely fancy, but enjoying the fantasy. In these gentle moments, the cowboys are just young men with hopes and humor, not the rugged mythical figures of legend. Eventually the fire burns low to glowing coals. The Milky Way arches overhead in all its glory. Out on the open range, far from city lights, the stars are dazzlingly bright, thick as a silver cloud. Many a cowboy who never set foot in a church still felt a spiritual awe under those stars, a sense of being close to the Creator or the universe's grand design. The night sky was their cathedral ceiling. One by one, the cowboys turn in. You spread your blankets out in your preferred spot. Maybe a slight rise for drainage if it rains. Maybe near a wagon wheel for windbreak, or just wherever you unrolled it earlier. You might take a moment to inspect the ground with your boots, kicking aside any sticks or stones, a lesson learned the hard way from sleeping on a jagged rock all night once. The air is cool now. You wrap your coat or an extra blanket around your shoulders and settle down. If it's a winter drive with cold nights, you might even heat a stone by the fire and tuck it near your feet in the bedroll for warmth. If tonight you're not on first watch, you have the luxury of falling asleep right away. You hear the soft scuff of boots as the first watch riders depart to circle the herd. A coyote howls in the distance, a lonesome, wavering cry. The cattle rustle but remain calm. A few answer with low moos. These sounds become the cowboy's lullaby. The rhythmic chirp of crickets, the occasional owl hoot, the gentle snores of a nearby bunkmate, all of it blends into a background of serenity. Out here there are no screeching wagon wheels or saloon pianos or shouting crowds. It's profoundly quiet. You pull your hat down over your eyes or wrap a bandana around your face to keep the night chill off your nose. Your horse hobbled nearby blows softly through its nostrils and lies down. Horses too seem to love the end of day, often rolling on their backs in the dirt in a little bedtime scratch before sleeping on their feet or side. Knowing your trusty horse is resting gives you peace of mind. This is the quieter side of cowboy life, and perhaps its saving grace. The days may be filled with toil and discomfort, but at night there is a kind of reward, the simple pleasure of rest earned by honest work. As you lie under the sky, you might see the band of the Milky Way, and recall it's the same sky your father or grandfather slept under. The continuity of it, the natural order, lends a comforting thought. Some cowboys would whisper a prayer of thanks, Thanks that the day went by without accident. Thanks for the food and the company, and perhaps a prayer for loved ones far away. Whether overtly religious or not, many felt a reverence in those starry moments. Small comforts meant a lot in this hard-scrabble life. A warm fire, a tin mug of coffee, a dry pair of socks kept for Sunday, a dog-eared deck of cards for a quick game, the sound of a buddy quietly picking out a tune on his harmonica, the brilliant sunset that set the sky on fire. These could offset, if only briefly, the hardships of the trail. Cowboys became connoisseurs of little joys. One might pull out a harmonica and play a slow, gentle song that reminds everyone of home. Another might produce a flask with a bit of whiskey saved for a special occasion, offering each man a swig. The burn is welcome and warms the belly as night fully falls. And of course, there was the comfort of the stars and the open air. Unlike miners in dark shafts or factory workers in dingy cities, cowboys had the beauty of nature around them always. They witnessed spectacular sunrises and sunsets, watched lightning dance on distant plains, saw herds of buffalo in earlier years or antelope running free. At night they could identify constellations or simply marvel at the shooting stars arcing now and then. Some nights the northern lights might even shimmer on the horizon if they were far north. Such sights could make a man feel part of something bigger and grander, easing the personal discomfort for a while. As one old cowboy reflected, "We slept poor, but we slept under $1 million sky." Finally, true fatigue takes over. Wrapped in your blanket, breathing in the cool night air scented with smoke and sagebrush, you drift off. The hardships of the day ebb away for now. In a few hours you'll be roused again, but at this moment you surrender to sleep. A coyote's yip becomes part of your dream, and the starlight guides you to deep slumber. You might not have a soft bed or a roof, but you have this peaceful moment, and sometimes that was just enough to keep a cowboy going. In the stillness of such nights, one understands the paradox of the cowboy's life, that beneath the grit and hardship was a profound connection to the land, and a freedom that few other lives afforded. It was a life that certainly sucked in many ways. Poor pay, brutal elements, danger at every turn, grime, loneliness, and bone-weariness. Yet those who lived it often looked back with a sort of fondness, remembering not the pain as much as the camaraderie, the open horizon, and the tranquil nights by the campfire. As you imagine yourself there, eyelids growing heavy by the dying embers, you can almost feel it. A gentle breeze, the quiet lowing of cattle settling down, and a brilliant night sky overhead. In that calm, you might find a measure of contentment stealing over you, despite all the reasons it was so hard. And perhaps finally, you truly drift into a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind of sleep only earned by a day of honest toil under the wide western sky, in a time when being a cowboy was both terribly hard and in rare moments wonderfully simple. Sweet dreams, and rest easy, cowboy. Tout